Faster than a fraudulent performance measure, stronger than a misplaced decimal point, able to leap complex compliance requirements at a single bound. It's Super Auditor! Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Auditors Save the World, one audit project at a time, where we bring you thrilling tales of daring audits and brave financial reviews. Here, our heroes don't wear capes, but they do wield the power of empirical evidence. Brought to you by the pros at Yellowbook-CPE. In each episode, we interview those legendary auditors who have truly rescued the day. Stay tuned, listeners, because this is one story you won't want to miss. And folks, don't forget to subscribe to our show in your podcast app of choice. And now, here's your host, Lita Hart-Fanta.
In a city bustling with growth, challenges, and change, one leader stands as the cornerstone of accountability. Meet Corrie, a relentless champion for transparency, a voice of reason, and a protector of the public trust. For over 200 audits, this fearless leader has uncovered truths, clarified concerns, and enhanced operations for the benefit of her community. With a deep knowledge of audit standards and a pulse on the citizens' priorities, Corrie is a beacon of trust, working to ensure Austin thrives, not seeking applause, but delivering facts that matter. Her audit team respects her, program managers listen to her, and her community thanks her for making things better, one audit at a time. This is the story of Corrie, the Audit Crusader, a leader with truth as her superpower and accountability as her mission.
First thing I wanted to tell you was I had a hard time figuring out, I think I've worked on easily more than 200 audits in my time with the city of Austin. And I was like, Lita wants to talk about audits. What audit would I pick? Like, there's so many good audits. Every year we do such cool stuff. I think I went back to something that was a while ago, but I picked it because it's something, well, one, I had noticed that you had, I noticed that you had some law enforcement and some IT controls. So you'd had some different conversations on the podcast. So I was trying to find something maybe you hadn't talked about yet. Although I do, I always enjoy talking about our public safety audits, but this one is really talking about our code investigations. And so as a city, we have code compliance function, which city code has a bunch of requirements in it. And then our code department, now they're actually a subset of another department. But at the time, our Austin code department was responsible for enforcing, complaints or investigating complaints and enforcing portions of the city code. So things like tall weeds and grass on a property, or these apartments, the locks aren't working. The landlord hasn't ensured that they have secure locks, or maybe the stairwell railing is loose. Lots of safety issues in rental properties. And then also they enforce work without a permit, which is like when somebody builds a shed or a
Deck.
extension deck, but without following the city code requirements. So this code department, it's kind of, I think it touches on a lot of people in the city of Austin. So that's how I landed on it as a topic for us. We've done a few different audits in this area, but this was the first time I think in my career where I did the same audit twice. And it was super frustrating. We did the first audit, I don't remember the years, but somewhere around like 2010. We did this audit and we had findings, and we said, you guys you're just not consistent. Like an investigation, a complaint comes in, and my expectation as a resident, right, is that I call in on my neighbor. I don't do that, but let's say I did. I call in on my neighbor and I say, hey, there's this property and it's like, looks like it's really dangerous. And they have these tall grass and weeds and there are rats running everywhere. And, can somebody come inspect it? Well, my expectation would be whether I call you from a fancy part of town or a not fancy part of town, my expectation is that you treat me the same. So that's really was the lens. Both times we did this audit, that was our lens, which was we want to see consistent practices when you get a complaint.
Okay.
We want to see that you follow the same processes, regardless of where the complaint comes from or how you end up with the complaint. We want to see you follow similar processes. So we're kind of looking at it from a consistency and equity lens, probably even before we were talking about an equity lens and auditing.
Yeah.
But anyway, we did the first audit. We basically we had the same findings twice again, kind of a weird situation. But when we did the first audit and we saw that, there were just we couldn't find two cases that were alike. Like we couldn't find two cases that beginning to end were handled similarly. And they didn't have clear guidance for like how long should it take you to when you receive the complaint, how long should it take you to go inspect it and go see if there is a problem? And there wasn't really set criteria. And then from there, how long if you give them, there's kind of a graduated system of warning. You say like,
Escalate.
hey, you need to fix this. Hey, you really need to fix this. Hey, we're about to fix it for you and charge you. Hey, we're going to take you to court over it. So there's like escalated process. And we didn't see that being consistently applied. So in that first audit, now a very long time ago, but we were seeing those issues. And so we issued recommendations and we said, you need clearer procedures for just better criteria or better triggers for like, here's how long it's going to take us to do this. And then your investigators will have more consistent information about kind of how much time they have to get something done. And then how much time the property owners will have good information on how long things should take.
Great ideas. How'd they respond to that?
So this was an interesting one. In the original audit, what basically happened was there were a lot of residents who were upset about this whole process, and they held a press conference, and they were like, "Fire the department director!"
Whoa!
And so it was very intense. The department director ended up leaving, and somebody new came in, and a new person was like, "I'm going to use this audit as a roadmap," and I think they did, and they made some progress. They did implement things like the
time.
How many days it should take, or here's when we would issue a violation notice versus just a warning. So they got a little bit more
systematic.
Yeah, more systematic, more procedures in place for people to follow so that it wasn't just kind of a free for all of, here's your complaint, go figure out what you're going to do with it. So it was a little more consistent. But then, and I think that director left as well. So there was a lot of turnover in the executive level here. And then we had some new council members come and say, we're really concerned about consistency of code investigations. We're like, but we already audited that. So we started with a follow-up audit. And when we followed up, we were like, ooh, a lot of these issues are still outstanding. We probably should do a full audit. It's been long enough. It's been 6 or 7 years.
Okay.
So we went in and we audited it again and saw a lot of the same things. They had better procedures in place, but they still weren't consistently following them.
Okay.
People just weren't being treated consistently. So we were looking at kind of how long did you have to resolve a violation? So somebody says, and here's one that is unfortunately, maybe not unfortunately, it's very common in Austin, is that you park an RV in your driveway. Well, code says you can't park your RV in your driveway. You have to have the RV behind a fence, and the fence has to be so-and-so tall.
Yeah.
Like a certain height. So if your neighbor calls and says, hey, this dude has a RV in his driveway, then code comes out and cites you. And they were giving people anywhere from 1 to 30 days to resolve their RV in the driveway complaint.
1 to 30? 1 to 30?
You might get 1 day, or you might get 30 days. Or you might get 7 or 14. So it was just really random, basically. Whatever that inspector was thinking, they'd talk to the property owner, and maybe the property owner would be like, yeah, I need like 2 weeks. And so they'd be like, okay, 14 days. We'll be back in 14 days to see if you resolve this. So they were working with the residents, but not very consistent. And so
did you notice that they treated people differently depending on if they lived in a high income neighborhood versus a lower income neighborhood?
So that was really interesting. We did that analysis because we were really curious, like, how do they prioritize complaints in certain areas more than others? And what we found was no, they were inconsistent throughout the city. So it wasn't anything.
Well, that's good. I guess that's ultimately pretty good.
For better or worse, they were inconsistent everywhere. And so we looked at when they started the investigation, how long people had to correct problems. We looked at how they documented it. So were there pictures? Were there, could let's say that investigator left and somebody else took over? Did they have enough information to continue? And then escalation was kind of the last piece of it, is like, were they, if it got to a point where it needed to be escalated, were they consistently escalating? And of course, if you're not doing those first steps consistently, then you're probably not doing the rest of the process consistently. And we didn't see a lot of escalation. In fact, a couple of years ago, we looked specifically at apartment complexes with violations. Like, that's where the owner of the apartment complex is supposed to have fixed problems. And we saw there, even with kind of large numbers of violations throughout an apartment complex, we still weren't seeing the escalation where we would actually take them to court, or we would do higher level, enforcement action.
Oh,
Still not great at that piece, I guess I would say.
do you think there was corruption going on there?
I don't. I think this was an area where they had a job to do, and they sent their inspectors out to do it. A lot of the inspectors were maybe for a while, they were former police officers, or they came from other, maybe they were former, had worked in our development services or our permitting office. Like, they were people that had enough experience to know that there was a problem, and then to do the thing, but they didn't have guidance on what they were really supposed to be doing. It wasn't super clear. And they didn't have, where you and I love to talk about, and auditors in general like to talk about cause, right? What was going on here? And I really think it was a lack of management oversight. The inspectors were doing their job, clearing their cases, getting their workload done, but there just wasn't that supervision, or somebody saying, like, how long did you give them? Or, I thought we were giving people 7 days for that, and just really not checking to see that they were being kind of consistent across the cases.
All right. And then, so what did you guys recommend then? First audit, you said get your little timeline together, get some processes.
Right, and we had kind of already said that, right? So, in
Okay.
theory, well, I mean, we had said that the first time around, right?
Right.
So, in theory, we'd already told them to go do that. But then in this audit, we did say they needed to kind of clean up their policies, clarify the expectations, specifically related to timelines. Then they needed a more rigorous case monitoring process. So that's really getting at the supervision piece of it. They needed somebody checking to see, like, just maybe doing a sample or looking across their assigned investigators to see, like, what's happening, and are these things kind of getting cleared. Another interesting issue was that we had these two different systems. So the systems where complaints came in was our 311 system,
Mhm.
which I think people are fairly familiar with, but anybody can call in with a complaint. And then we had Amanda, which we use it for a lot of things in the city, but it's like kind of the case assignment system. So they weren't really integrated. So your complaint came in, and then it was kind of manually entered into this other system.
Mhm.
I said they should look at that and see if there was a kind of more automatic way to do that from an efficiency perspective.
Mhm.
The other thing is another thing that we noticed in this audit is that a lot of the inspectors, they were required to have certain levels of certification based on their rank. So if you're like an inspector A, you need this, and if you're an inspector B, you need this. And they hadn't really all gotten the certification. So they got hired, and then they had 6 months to get them, and then nobody checked to make sure that they got them within that 6 months. And so that was another area where we said, if you're going to require it, then you need to make sure people are getting it. And actually what they ended up doing in that case was kind of revisiting the requirements. Didn't really match. It was a state certification that you could get, but it didn't really match the kind of work our inspectors were doing.
Ah, relevant.
Yeah, and they ended up kind of backing off and saying, actually, at these levels, we want this certification, not this certification, or we're going to develop some in-house training that'll be better than, or more relevant than the certifications they were requiring as part of the job.
Huh.
Kind of fun. So our recommendations mostly, I think it was really revised, make sure your policies are super clear, but then actually develop and implement some monitoring across inspectors and across types of not across types of cases.
It's kinda like the Wild West, a little bit of Wild West a little bit.
A little bit. Yeah.
Luck of the draw. Yeah, because my husband's a handyman, so he gets involved in building decks and sheds and repairing things, and he also used to be a builder, and the city of Austin is notorious throughout the state. My dad's a builder in Houston and used to try to work in Austin, and he just couldn't deal with it because he felt like the regulations and the inspector behavior was just, keeping him from making money.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Yellowbook-CPE, the heroes behind the jumbo bundle of self-study courses. With a 1-year subscription, you get access to over 170 hours of top-notch CPE content. Dive into thrilling tales of agile, IT auditing, fraud, and internal controls. All courses carry NASBA's quality seal, so you know they've got the superpower of trustworthiness. Just click the link in the description to sign up. And now, back to our story.
Did you see that from the audit? Is that
So that is definitely, I think, a common perception of the city of Austin's permitting process.
yeah?
I would say in this case, so we were really looking, so the code inspectors are more on the
Back
after the fact, you didn't bother with the permit, and now they're coming in and saying, hey,
Right.
You built this too close to your neighbor's property, or you didn't use the right material for XYZ.
Right.
So for this audit, that was really more on the after the fact. I think we've done a lot of work on the permitting side. I think one of the things we always point out is that one of the reasons our permitting process is so complex is because our code is so complex.
Right.
So we have a land development code that started off fairly complex that we've been adding on to and not revising for the last 30 years.
Right.
And I think then it makes it hard for our developers and also makes it hard for our staff to get people trained up to understand what the requirement even is when they're reviewing applications.
Now, where did that come from back 30 years ago? Is it an environmental concern? Were they copying some other
I
community?
think our initial land development code was pretty common, and then we layered on it, and I think importantly so, we layered some environmental requirements on it.
Mhm.
As we did, we had a desired development zone. We had different requirements if you're over the aquifer in West Austin versus if you're in East Austin, and so that added a layer. But then I think just over time we make policies and policy decisions and add layers of code that just keep making it more and more complex.
Yeah.
And at some point, there was an effort. You may remember the Code Next
Yeah.
efforts a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
5 years ago or so, where I think City Council was making an effort to update the code, and there was a lot of resistance to it, to doing a kind of a wholesale code update. And I think they're working on that. I think they're going to continue to do that, maybe in smaller bites,
Okay.
and that hopefully makes it easier to develop in Austin. Well, I don't know about easier to develop, but more straightforward.
Clear. Yeah. So you've got this code that's complex. You've got different interpretations of the code. You got these inspectors who are out there that are using their own judgment,
Yep.
which you want them to have to, decide how to treat these code violations. So what do you think they are now?
Well, I think last time we were in this area, it seemed a lot more structured. And I think that was key for us, is to just have it like, within 7 days, you're going to do this. Within this many days, you're going to do this. And we're going to try to hit that.
Yeah.
It's not an area we followed up on these recommendations and felt like they'd been implemented. We haven't followed up since then to kind of see where the department is at. And as I mentioned, this has actually shifted from one department to another, this responsibility.
Yeah. Now, this is a very interesting subject matter, but why did it get your attention when you looked at your list and go, I know you're trying to give us some variety in the podcast, so I really appreciate that. But what else made you go, that was interesting?
Well, part of it is just we all see it, right? Like, I mean,
We're living it. Yeah.
my grandparents had an RV parked in their driveway. There was some people have a boat on a trailer, and the boats are really funny because you could actually, if it's in the street, it's actually same with RVs. I think if it's in the street, it's the responsibility of the police department. If it's in your driveway, it's the responsibility of the code department. So if you just move it back and forth,
Oh, that's funny. Put them against each other. Oh, that's good to know.
right?
In case I get a boat and want to,
Just move it back and forth.
Yeah.
No, I just think it's something that we see as residents. You see these properties and maybe you call something in and you say, "Oh, this looks really dangerous," and then kind of curious what happened to that. So
Yeah.
I think that's part of why I picked this one. I also always like this kind of process audit where you can look at, or maybe I don't know if process audit is the right term, but where you can look at kind of each piece of the process. So, okay, let's look at first thing that happens is a complaint comes in. Okay, let's talk about that part. And then next, they go out and they inspect it and they say, oh, yeah, this shouldn't have happened. They issue a violation. And so you can kind of break this audit down, or it's interesting to break the
Sure.
audit down into kind of each piece of the process.
Yeah, that feels more straightforward.
Yeah.
Now, what kind of audit objectives do you just go, oh no? Like you're like city council, they want something taken care of, but then you're like, oh no, not that. So you mentioned equity before. That's a really hard subject matter.
It's hard, but it's so fun. Like,
Oh, tell me about
and it's so important. Like, it's such a,
yeah, it is.
I don't know, it's such a key thing, right? We want our residents to be treated fairly and to have equal access to services. And so I find those kind of, those audits are hard to come up with a methodology, often hard to have the data that you need
Right.
to do the analysis. But if you have it, I think those are super cool. The ones that I've gotten better at least, I won't say I say no to these, but I help the council craft better language. Oftentimes they'll give us they'll say, we want you to go look at, we had one where we hired an outside consultant to look at water quality events in Austin.
Water quality events, because we were having a problem with contamination of our water, with flood.
Yes.
What's happening? Okay. Gotcha.
Exactly. So we'd had 5, we were calling them water quality incidents. 3 of them were water boil notices. So where large areas of the city had to boil water. And then one of them had to do with zebra mussels, which are no good. They impact the water quality as we're bringing water in to treat it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And then I forgot what the 5th one was. It wasn't zebra mussels or a water boil notice. But anyway, these kind of water quality events where something has happened and we have an issue. And so council wrote a resolution. And when they first wrote it, it was like, these are the 270 questions we want this audit to answer.
270?
Oh, no, it was a lot.
Okay. All right.
They can make it up 270, but it was a very, very long list. And multiple council members had gotten together and kept adding to the questions. And I was like, wait. Like, happy to do the work, happy to hire a consultant to do the work. Love the concept. This is exactly the kind of thing my office should be doing. But let's take a step back on the. So I worked with them, and we've done this. We've had a couple. I had one where I let it go through kind of with everybody's questions. It was a cultural centers audit, and I let it go through with the laundry list of questions. And then my team was tracking down all of these things.
Whoa, data points. Whoa.
And since then, that one was in 2019, I think. Since then, I've been better about saying questions include but are not limited to, or just the auditor should consider these questions because, a key part of our process is the risk assessment.
Right.
So if I just take the laundry list of questions that you might have about this program or approach or whatever it is and copy paste it into my audit objective, then that's a really big audit.
Right.
Versus going through our normal process of considering risk and definitely considering all of these questions you gave me, but then still hopefully zeroing in on something that, on the higher risk areas and on a bigger deal for the city. So that was definitely for me a lesson learned of not taking the
don't do it.
Don't do it. I think
How do they take it when you come back and go, well, you gave us 100 questions and we answered 5.
I don't think that I've ever had anybody come back and say that. I feel like they really do rely on us and rely on our process. They rely on us as the audit experts and on our process to get them the most critical information. And in the case of that water quality events, the consultants, we wrote most of the things that, not all 270 or however many I said it was, but we wrote a lot of it into the scope of work for them to consider. And then they use their professional judgment as water engineers and water professionals to kind of identify which areas they felt like they needed to spend more time on versus less time on. So it can be done. But it was still, that's a lot bigger project or bigger approach than what I want to do in an audit, because I really do want to spend our resources on those really big risks.
Yeah.
So.
Now, for this coming What's on your audit plan for this year? Do you do it annually or do you do it on a
Yeah, we do it annually, so the calendar year plan just came out,
Alright.
and, we do have some carryover on there. The carryover projects are pretty interesting. We're looking at the city's extreme heat preparedness.
extreme heat instead of extreme cold? That's good.
Yes. So something that, we've seen in other cities doing some work on that, and the city of Austin started thinking about that because that's something that, one, we have some control over in terms of we have the electric utility, we have the water utility, we have
Yeah.
our parks department, which is responsible for the urban canopy. So,
Oh,
the, interesting
that is interesting, Corey. That's fascinating. Urban canopy. That is super cool.
urban canopy.
That's what we need. Give us some plants around here. Okay.
So that one's a carryover. The one that we already started should be coming out soon.
Mhm.
We have one on police, recruiting and hiring. So we're looking at the recruiting and hiring processes at the police
Mm,
department. That's been a big challenge since
the defunding.
2020. And then some ones that are on the
What are you asking? What are you asking about recruiting? Do you know? What are you asking about?
we're looking at the processes that they have in place to see if they are getting enough recruit to get through their training program. So what efforts are they taking to identify? We know that they have attrition and they have lots of vacancies to fill. So what work are they doing to get as many people in the door as they can? We're looking at their diversity kind of approach to diversity. That'll be interesting.
Yeah, that will be interesting.
And then some ones that won't start for a little while, but are on the plan for this year. We're doing we're again on the kind of disaster preparedness front. We're looking at flood preparedness.
Mm,
So another Central Texas, floods are
sure.
a way of life, unfortunately, in Central Texas. So we're looking at our efforts to help our residents be prepared for flooding. And then we're looking at speed reduction. So that one is we've seen an uptick in traffic related fatalities, particularly
Mm,
bicycles and pedestrians. And so looking at what the city is doing, what the city can do to reduce speeds,
mm,
which is a contributing factor to a lot of really it's to how serious an accident is. Higher speed accidents obviously
mm,
tend to have worse outcomes.
mhm.
Speed reduction.
Let's take that let's take that. Let's just sit on that for a second.
Yep.
Thank you, Corey. This is fascinating, and I'm not gonna keep holding you, but your work is obviously really relevant to me.
I love this. Yes.
So this is really cool. All right, so, Lance Armstrong inspired a bunch of, cyclists to get out on 360, which is a freeway, okay? And the city has decided to build bike lanes all around the city, but the bike lanes
Mhm.
are squeezing the traffic. I mean, there's all these like ripple effects, like, you've got bikers who are endangering their lives to see the scenery and have a straight, line so they can really Lance Armstrong it. But at the same time, it's so awful. They're getting killed because they're crossing the entrances and exits of these freeway.
Yeah.
So we're building more bike lane. I mean, is it really the speed that has caused this problem, or is it that we're encouraging little Lance Armstrongs around the city? You know what I'm saying?
This is such a great question.
Okay. All right.
I don't know the answer to it, but I will say that we are a bike friendly city.
Kinda.
We're complicated, right? We're in Texas. So we want to be bike friendly, but our culture is not super bike or pedestrian friendly. And so it's the merging,
We're not Holland. We got big ass trucks.
right. And I think so that's the key for us to keep all of the people who want to use our roadways, whether they're bikes or cars or trucks or
Yeah.
walking, I think we have an education component is really critical to keeping everybody safe.
Here.
And then the speed reduction, we've done some work in this area before. Number one way to reduce traffic incidents, particularly incidents that result in injury or death, is speed enforcement.
All right.
But we're in a world not just us, all the cities in the country, our police are stretched thin, and traffic enforcement is not what they're spending most of their time on.
Right.
They're spending their time on more serious things, but it does mean that if they're not doing enforcement, what else can we do? to kind of reduce the severity of injuries and accident. And so that's where you have things like reducing the speed or just signage. Right now, there's a big push in South Austin with, signage that says, did you know how many people were killed on this roadway last year? It's a little dark.
Ooh.
It's like, or there's signs that are like, high, I forgot what it's called, but it's basically like, this is an unsafe roadway. I think all along Slaughter, there are those signs.
That's so unreal. The name is Slaughter too, isn't it?
Oh yeah, forgot about that.
It's unreal.
I mean, I didn't even connect that.
I know. I was about to use that word when I was going to follow the question. I'm going to go, are those on Slaughter?
Yeah.
But I mean, we don't have sidewalks. There's a lot of things that add into this. But you're right. If everybody would just slow down to a crawl, we'd be fine.
It's a lot safer.
Right? If we just went 20 miles an hour, it'd be okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's if we're not going to do enforcement and, there's some state grants that we get for targeted enforcement at really dangerous intersections and that kind of thing. And
yeah,
that's great. But if beyond that, we're not really doing enforcement of reckless or dangerous driving behavior, then what can we do?
Wow.
Yeah. Speed reduction is one of them.
What a tangle. I'm glad I'm not the city auditor. I'd be going, well, what about that? Well, what about that? Well, what about that?
Is that, we only get a certain number of new projects a year, and it's hard to narrow it down.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're doing excellent work. Nationwide, admirable, excellent work. I highly recommend anybody who's really interested in making impact, look at the City of Austin Auditor's Office website and look at their reports, look at the subject matter they choose. You are making a huge difference. I'm very proud that you are leading the city with your audit work.
I'm proud of my office and of all the staff that make it possible. It is very cool.
You are killing it.
Thank you, brave listeners, for joining us on this adventure. We appreciate your loyalty. Take a moment to subscribe and share this podcast with all your audit allies. And don't miss out on Yellowbook-CPE's upcoming webinars. Because every superhero needs their training, and Yellowbook-CPE offers continuing education that's relevant, convenient, and as thrilling as the fight for justice. Until next time, audit on!